All right, so today we're going to have a look at scales. So before last week we looked at chords, which allowed us to take notes and turn them into chords. This time we're going to look at scales, which are kind of similar in a way, sort of groups of notes that go together, but they work in a different way. So let's jump in and have a look. This is the worksheet. And to start with, we'll just have a look at this arpy group of sounds from the standard default samples. If you look in that arpy folder, you'll see there's 11 sounds in there. And they are tuned to a particular scale. So Kindo made them and he contributed them. And when he made them, he recorded them not every note of the normal 12-tone equal temperament scale, which is what pianos are normally tuned to, but to a pentatonic scale called Richisen. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but yeah, Richisen. Yeah, who knows? Let's see. So if we listen to this, there are 5 notes to an octave. Normally there's 12 in the normal Western way of doing things, but in this scale there's 5. So if we go between 0 and 5, that should jump up and down an octave. And we can go up 2 octaves. So that's 10 notes starting from 0. So that's one way of working with scales. Just record a bunch of notes that are part of a particular scale, and then do fun stuff with it. But there are other ways. Here I'm just, this bit is just comparing 0 and 5 here with 0 and 12 with a piano. Just to demonstrate that 0 and 5 in the Richisen scale is the same as 0 and 12 in the super piano, in the 12-tone equal temperament scale. So once you're working in a scale, it's quite funny. So sticking with arpy sounds, we can just add random notes to it. It always kind of sound a bit like a melody because it's sort of stuck in a particular scale, especially with pentatonic ones. All the notes seem to go well together. So almost any combination of notes together will sound good. This is an example, by the way, of using random numbers in an interesting way. So there's an underlying melody, but then there's some random numbers added to that, but only between 0 and 2. So 3 different random numbers that are possibly generated from this. So you can still kind of hear that underlying melody. It's just adding variety to it. Right, so now we're going to try that with a super piano. Just doesn't sound very good. It's jumping around all of the 12 notes of that scale, and they don't naturally go well together. But you can fix that with the scale function. So there's our numbers, and it's feeding into scale. It's the same scale as arpy is tuned to, but we're just going to use these synthesized notes to convert from this pentatonic Richisen scale to the 12-tone equal temperament scale. So that now sounds the same as that. Actually, it's exactly the same. That's what we talked about before with the random numbers not being, or always being deterministic. So actually it's picking the same random numbers. If I wanted them to be different, I'd have to shift time in some way like this. Well, that was supposed to be a quick demo and oh, there we go. Yeah, you can hear that's kind of adding a bit of variety there. Okay. That was a bit of an aside. So there we are. That's the scale function. There's actually loads of scales built in. I think someone called Maro contributed this originally, and someone's recently added some extra ones. But yeah, that's all of them, and you can play about with them. Enigmatic, I don't know what that is like. Let's try that. I remember Laurie telling me that Mixolydian always kind of sounds kind of doom metal. Maybe not with this kind of jolly tune, I don't know. I don't know. So play around with those different scales, see if you can find ones that speak to your heart. And okay, so next I want to talk about sort of using waveforms to select from a scale. So that means that you're kind of moving around a scale in different ways. Using randomness is kind of randomness is a kind of waveform actually, because it's continuously changing, just jumping around all over the place. But if you use something like a sine wave, it's like you can hear yourself going up and down that scale. So here I'm picking a minor scale with a super saw synth. This synth always sounds a bit better if you had a bit of a low pass filter, which is what I've done there. I've added some legato so that the notes are shorter, so they're like half the normal length. So you can hear it going up and down the scale following this sine wave curve. There's various things I could do here. I should just explain range. So sine normally goes from 0 to 1 with a decimal number. So anywhere in between 0 and 1, it'll go up and down smoothly. But then I make it with the range function, so it goes the same shape but going between 0 and 14. So that it'll go between I guess it'll go up to 14, so it'll probably only pick 14 different notes from 0 to 13. But then the problem is that scale at the moment only accepts whole numbers, which might actually be something I should fix. But you have to convert it from these floating point decimal numbers to whole integer numbers. And you do that with this floor thing. So floor just means that you just throw away the decimal component. So if it's 13.9, it'll just throw away the 0.9 to end up with 13. You could also put round here, and then it would round up or down to the nearest number. Slightly different. So that's that, going between 0 and 14 along the curve, making sure it's a whole number, otherwise it won't work. It'll come up with an error, just to double check. Yeah, no instance for blah blah integer. Yeah, it's trying to treat an integer as a fractional number, which it can't do for some reason. And then, so that turns it into a whole number, and then this will convert from minor scale to the 12-tone temperament, equal temperament scale, Oh, and also need to put something to structure it, because without this there will just be silence. And that's because there's no events along a sine curve, it's just a continuous flow. And so we need to sample events from that curve, and we do that in this case with segment, which will take 16 events every cycle. So here, to jump down an octave, I had to add -12, even though this is in the minor scale, which I think has 7 notes in it. Outside of this scale function, it's converted it to equal temperament. So I'm back in the land of equal temperament. So to go down an octave, I subtract 12. If I wanted to go back into the minor scale, I could do this if I really wanted. And then I'd put -7, I think. Of course, you can pattern this. So lots of fun to be had. So yeah, that's how to get something like a waveform so that you can pick notes from it and applying it to a particular scale so that it sounds coherent. If we didn't have the scale there, let's just take this away. Then okay, yeah, because we're not using the scale function, we don't need that round thing anymore. It actually doesn't sound that bad, but it's not to a particular scale, so it's not quite as not quite as coherent. So the next bit is showing you that when we're doing this range thing, which I've now deleted from here, oh yeah, no, there it is. We can actually pattern that, and that can, because we're working within a fixed scale, it can sound really interesting. So this is taking a long time to repeat because it's this repeats every 3 cycles, this repeats every 4 cycles, so it'll take a lot of cycles, I think 12, for it to get back to where it started. So the first time around it'd be 0 to 12, and then 4 to 14, -8 to 13, 0 to -13, then 4 to 12. So yeah, there's lots of ranges and scales going on here, all fitting to that minor scale. We can also pattern this if we wanted, so we could switch between minor and major. I think minor's supposed to make you feel really sad, and major's supposed to make you feel really happy, so careful with those mood swings. So we just with the rhythm, we just had this really kind of monotonous 16 steps per cycle going on. But we can also use struct to give that a bit more of a rhythmic structure. I've also added a waveform to the low pass filter. Range that between 400 and 5,000. Give some extra shape to it. I can slow that down. Bit of a longer form automation. So this is a Euclidean pattern. this T stands for true. I think we've gone through this before, but just to recap. So that means that it'll create true values. It's jumping, actually. It's patterned between 9 and 7. So the first cycle, it'll be 9 steps that it'll fill in out of 16, which will try and do as evenly as possible. And the next time around, it'll be 7 out of 16. So it's jumping between those two values every other cycle. Needs a bit of reverb, I think. Okay. So here I'm actually, we're using a sine wave here, jumping around with the ranges, but it's basically a sine wave going up and down. But you can actually add or multiply different waveforms together in order to create different shapes that are more complex. So here there's a sine wave and a cosine, which is just a sine wave that's shifted in time a little bit. And then they're both going at different speeds. So if you add them together, you'll get an interesting shape coming out. And I'm also multiplying it by, instead of using range, I'm just multiplying it. So it's going between 0 and 6, the first cycle, and then the second cycle, it'll go from 0 to -3. So let's try that. Yeah, I like it playing with these waveforms. I've not really done much of this actually. It's something I should do more of. It kind of makes things sound composed because there's that shape behind it, and it's fit into a scale. And yeah, sounds good. So this is just dropping the struct in instead of the segment. Got the segment as well, it's not needed. And then the same again, but just adding an off, which we saw earlier this week. So offset by 1/4 of a cycle, I'm jumping up the octave. Again, this is an octave because I'm outside of, there's no scale applied to this bit. And so on. So there we go. See how you feel about playing with that. There's a lot of scope, I think, here to come up with a wide variety of melodies just by adding together waveforms. But you can also just use scale just to make up quick melodies by hand while working within a particular scale. So scale, major, it's just a really quick, nice way to come up with melodies, really. And you should also just have a look at all the different scales available. There's all sorts of things, and yeah, it's worth looking them up and seeing a bit of the history that lies behind these things. They all have their cultural resonances, And we're used to, in the West at least, hearing quite a small range of them on the radio, so good to experiment. All right, thanks for listening, and see you on the forums. Take care.